Virtue ethics. What is it? How can we use it? What are its weaknesses? The core idea of this moral doctrine is that the right moral action is the action that would be performed by a virtuous person. According to virtue ethics, what matters morally then is not what we do at the time, but what we become over time. We all make mistakes, but so long as we recognize and learn from our mistakes, we will be on the way to acquiring a good character. So, according to virtue ethics, there is no set of rules such that if we follow them, we will do the right thing. The virtue ethicist also believes that we will not succeed in doing the right thing if we simply try to produce some consequence, even if that consequence is perhaps happiness or equality. According to virtue ethics, the only way of being sure of doing the right thing is to become the right sort of person, a person who possesses all the virtues. Such a person cannot but act morally because their actions are the expression of a virtuous character. Consider the following scenario. An unemployed biologist is interviewed for his dream job. The interview goes well until he discovers the company is funded by a Christian organization that expects employees to be Christian. Although he could get away with claiming to be Christian, the biologist doesn't want to lie and so loses his job. This example pushes us to think about what is a virtue. A virtue is a disposition to act in a certain way, courageously or honestly or benevolently. In order to acquire a virtue, one needs to reflect on that virtue, discover its true character and what it requires of one. So, acquiring the virtue is not an easy matter. It's a matter of becoming honest, courageous, wise, temperate, kind, and loyal. It also requires obeying the golden mean, which amounts to not going to extremes in anything you do. For instance, in facing danger, you do not act in either a rash or a cowardly way, but rather courageously. It's also necessary, according to virtue ethics, that your actions are done in accordance with that virtue. So it's no good if one knows what honesty is and what it requires, if one doesn't do what honesty requires. It is necessary to do what a virtue requires because that virtue requires it. So telling the truth out of a momentary spite or because one is unable to think of a convincing lie is not a manifestation of the virtue of honesty. But virtue ethics, understood in this way, doesn't prescribe what one should do in a specific situation. This is because, according to this doctrine, there is no manual, no textbook for how to act morally. The best one can do is to emulate the virtuous person and her decisions. In this way, one learns how to act morally. Once acting morally has become a habit of a person, then that person is deemed to be virtuous. But her knowledge, acquired through reflection on the character of virtues and what they require, and through learning from other moral virtuous persons, is practical knowledge, and that is why it's not considered to be something which can be translated into a set of rules. So, as a decision procedure, virtue ethics advises that we follow the advice and example of those whom we respect and consider to be virtuous persons. It's not only individuals that follow this general guideline in the face of moral dilemmas, according to virtue ethics. Governments should also do the same, and they do it when they put together committees of the great and the good. In dealing with bioethical issues, such committees are quite common. The best of them will draw members with proven track records from a wide range of backgrounds and views, the better to ensure that every perspective is covered. For example, in 1982, the British government formed a committee of inquiry to develop principles by which to regulate IVF and embryology. In particular, to determine the moral status of the embryo. The committee was chaired by the philosopher Mary Warnock. The committee concluded that the human embryo should be protected, but that research on embryos and IVF would be permissible given appropriate safeguards. The committee proposed the establishment of a regulatory authority to license the use in treatment, storage, and research of human embryos. This body became the Human Fertilization and Embryology Authority. The findings of the committee were published in the Warnock Report in 1984, which formed the basis for the Human Fertilization and Embryology Act. So what objections one might raise for virtue ethics? A first problem is knowing who is virtuous. Isn't it possible for someone to pretend to be virtuous? A dishonest person, for example, will want us to trust him. This gives him reason to tell the truth most of the time. But he will hold himself ready to lie to us when it will benefit him. How can we distinguish such a person from a person who really is honest? Then one can doubt that there are any virtuous people. After all, human beings can be ignorant. They often don't know what to do. They are weak. They often do not do what they should do. And dishonest. They sometimes do what they should, but for the wrong reasons. If no one is virtuous, surely virtue theory seems impractical. A third problem is circularity. Is an act virtuous because a virtuous person performs it? Or does the virtuous person perform it because the act is virtuous? Which comes first, the virtuous person or the virtuous act? Could there be an act such that it was 1, virtuous, and 2, no virtuous person could perform it? Finally, there is the issue of determining what is a virtue. Is Aristotle's list the definitive list of virtues? What would we say about the list of virtues proposed by the Catholic Church?